What's up guys, it's Weston here. So today I'm putting the Ryzen 7 1700 against the i7 7700K, and I'm going to be seeing which is better for productivity and for gaming as well. Now before we jump into the benchmarks and the comparisons, let's take a look at the systems first to see what we're running. So for the Ryzen side, we've got the Ryzen 7 1700 at stock frequencies. For the motherboard, we've gone for the MSI X370 SLI Plus, which I have reviewed and is in the description. Now we get on to Intel, and we've used the i7 7700K at stock frequencies and the MSI Z270 Carbon Gaming Edition motherboard, which I've also reviewed and will be in the description as well. For RAM, we've stuck with exactly the same 16GB kit of Corsair Vengeance LPX RAM, clocked at 2400 MHz. Now I do know that Ryzen runs better on higher frequency memory, but the 2400 is all I had to hand, and I wanted to keep this test as fair as possible, so I've used exactly the same kit. Graphics card next, and I've used the Zotac Amp Extreme 8GB 1070 graphics card for both of these, so there's no change there, and the graphics card is at stock frequencies as well, so I've not overclocked it at all. Storage next, and we've got a Kingston HyperX 120GB SSD for my operating system and a few programs, and a 1TB Western Digital Green for games, and that is exactly the same for both systems. So only other thing that's different is the power supplies I used, and that is a 750 watt OCZ power supply for the Ryzen build and an 850 watt for the Intel, but again, power supplies don't really affect performance at all. And also one final thing is the cooler. So I used the stock one on Ryzen and a H75 on Intel, but again, because we're not overclocking, we're not going to be pushing massive temperatures on these, and I don't think that the cooler will really affect performance that much anyway. So now we've got the systems out of the way and everything else, let's jump in and see which one of these is better for productivity first.
So first up is Cinebench R15, and you can clearly see that Ryzen takes a huge lead in multi-core performance. It's not a huge surprise, as its 8 cores and 16 threads easily outmatch what the 7700K is offering. So next up is the built-in benchmark for CPU Z, and it's a similar story. The Ryzen destroys Intel for multi-core, but Intel does win on the single, and it's been like that since pretty much forever. Geekbench next, and the story is exactly the same. Intel wins on single core and AMD on multi. Handbrake next, and AMD again did better. With this 5-minute 1080p video, AMD wins by a good 26 seconds. Pretty impressive if you ask me. Intel still did good, but for video conversion, AMD is better. And it's exactly the same for 4K video too. The AMD takes the win with a lead of 1 minute 4 seconds. So that means if you do a lot of video conversion, AMD would definitely be a wise choice, because it would save you a lot of time in the long run. On to PCMark's home test, which tests for everyday tasks like web browsing, Skype chat, photo editing, and just really light use. And it's here Intel takes the win, and by a decent margin too. Now this could be down to AMD not being fully optimized for PCMark yet, or it could also be other reasons too. Then we move on to PCMark's creative tests, and this is the same as home, but it adds some more intense tasks and heavier workloads like video editing. You can see that AMD has really closed the gap, but Intel does still win, but the margin isn't as big this time. Next on to WinRAR compression, and I was expecting to see AMD crush Intel, but the results I got were surprising. Intel managed to compress the 10GB folder 25 seconds faster than AMD. Again, I thought AMD's strong multi-core would have done better on this, but I was wrong. Onto video editing next, and to keep things as fair as possible, I chose to turn off Intel Boost. Now this is an Adobe feature for Intel that increases the performance based for Intel based systems. Now obviously I wanted to turn that off to keep things as fair as possible. Also, this program doesn't use GPU acceleration, but that wouldn't have mattered as the GPUs I used are exactly the same. So then we get onto results, and for 1080p render 5-minute MP4, the Intel was a full 40 seconds faster. The AMD is still quick, but you can't argue with 40 seconds, that is quite a big margin. I thought these results were a little bit odd, so I made sure that AMD was utilising all of its 8 cores. And you can see by the screenshot that it was, so it clearly wasn't that. So there is something going on there. AMD is not quite optimised for Adobe fully yet, but maybe we'll see more of that in the future. Switching to 4K, and AMD really closes the gap now to just 15 seconds. which tells me that if you're rendering really long 4K video, AMD might actually be better than Intel.
Right guys, so now you've seen how these cope in productivity, and I'm pretty impressed with both CPUs. Yes, Intel took some and AMD took some as well. Now, one thing to notice for video editing, even though the AMD was slower and did render the video slower, it was actually much smoother during editing. Now, I edit a lot of 4K footage from my Panasonic G7, and it was just a much nicer and smoother experience on the AMD. Yes, it rendered slower, but not by much, and it's just an overall better experience. Plus, I've also found that I could run more programs in the background with AMD than I could Intel, and I could also do some multitasking as well, something the Intel did struggle a lot more with. So if you're a heavy multitasker, then keep that in mind. But now we're going to get onto gaming, and we're going to be focusing on the FPS average, as that's more than likely what the CPUs are going to be delivering. So anyway, let's jump into the gaming benchmarks.
So Arkham Knight at 1080p showed a win for Intel with an average of 137 FPS to AMD's 120. Not a massive difference really, and if you game with FreeSync, G-Sync or V-Sync, you'd probably not even tell the difference. It's only if you leave it unlocked that you might see a bit of a difference between the two. Switch it up to 1440 and AMD closes the gap, delivering an average of 97 FPS to Intel's 103. Still losers, but the margin is much less. BioShock next, and it's the same story. Intel takes the lead over AMD, delivering 211.8 to AMD's 186.4. Still mighty impressive frame rates by both, but again, Intel does deliver a better result, but both will give fantastic performance for this game. Again, 1440p, AMD does close the gap, delivering 146.3 to Intel's 158.4. Still impressive, and again you're getting great performance from both CPUs. Grid 2 next, and AMD didn't fare so well. It delivered 107.3 to Intel's 160.9. Now that is a massive difference, and it seems like Grid seems to be more optimized and working better for Intel. But crank up the settings to 1440p and the AMD does catch up again. It delivers 111.8 to Intel's 133.1. It still lags behind a little bit, but the gap is much closer. GTA 5 next, and I know that GTA prefers fewer faster cores that the Intel offers, so the results are probably not going to be too surprising, and they're really not actually. Intel wins with an impressive 110.1 to AMD's 85.2. Now we turn that up to 1440p and the results are pretty much the same. Intel wins by an equally big margin, in fact just over 30 FPS. Metro Last Light at 1080p gives us another win for Intel, not by a huge degree but a little win nevertheless. Metro at 1440 delivers AMD's first win, giving us a minor 3 FPS advantage over Intel. It's not much, but it is a slight win. Rise of the Tomb Raider is again another win for Intel, delivering 129.4 to AMD's 99.8. You can also see that AMD show a dip below 60 FPS on the minimum. Not something to actually notice during gaming, but that's what the results show. Turn that up to 1440 and AMD wins by a very minor margin. So Intel delivered 84.8 and AMD 85.2, so it's very close. Again, AMD seems to suffer on the minimum end too, delivering a low minimum average than Intel. However, if you look at the maximum FPS, and AMD did better. And last of all, let's look at the Shadow of Mordor. And no surprise, Intel takes the win at 1080p with a difference of 14.3 FPS. AMD still delivered a strong show with 110.9. And again, we turned that up to 1440p, and Intel delivered a weird spike at max frame rate, don't know what happened there. But again, AMD did close the gap to 11 FPS on average.
Right guys, and there you have it. That is the gaming benchmarks and the productivity benchmarks out of the way. So what can we take away from this? Well, I've already said for productivity that I think AMD is better. It's better for multitasking, it copes better with my 4K footage in the Adobe program that I use, and I could do some more multitasking whilst I was editing and rendering video as well, something which the Intel struggled a lot more with. Onto gaming, and actually I found there was no difference during gameplay at all. Yes, the numbers are wildly different, but I have to say during actual gaming there was no difference at all. Now I game at 1440p with VSync on, and there was no difference at all. Both were locking in 60 FPS, no problems at all. So yeah, for gaming, as long as you stick to FreeSync, VSync and G-Sync, then either of these CPUs is going to give you a good performance. Yes, the numbers on the Intel are better, which is quite obvious at the minute because Intel is more optimized for games than AMD is. But obviously, as now AMD is more prominent, we're going to be seeing some further optimization for AMD in the future. So these results are probably going to change in a few months time when more optimization and game developers obviously optimize more for AMD. So this is going to change in a few months, and I think AMD is obviously going to catch up a lot more. But anyway, for now, Intel, yes, it's still a little bit better for gaming, but AMD, in my opinion, is better for productivity. So anyway, that is pretty much it for this video. So to wrap it up again, AMD is better for productivity and multitasking, Intel is better for gaming for now. So yeah, that is pretty much it. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you found it useful, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe if you enjoyed it. Also, any shares would be greatly appreciated too. So yeah, that is it again. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all on the very next one.